You've been calling it love for so long that you've forgotten what love is supposed to feel like. You've convinced yourself that the anxiety in your chest every time they don't text back is passion, that the constant need to prove your worth is devotion, that the exhaustion of always being the one who tries harder is commitment. But really, if you're honest with yourself in the middle of the night when you can't sleep because you're wondering if they still want you, you know this isn't love, this is survival. This is the desperate clinging of someone who learned early that connection is something you earn through suffering, something you maintain through sacrifice, something you lose the moment you stop being useful or entertaining or convenient enough to keep around. You call it love because calling it what it actually is, which is terror of abandonment dressed up in romantic language, would mean admitting that you don't actually know how to be in a relationship without making yourself smaller, without monitoring their moods, without constantly calculating whether you're doing enough to deserve their continued presence in your life. And that admission feels too vulnerable, too exposing, so you keep calling it love and wondering why love hurts this much, why it feels like drowning, why you can't remember the last time you felt peaceful instead of anxious in this relationship that's supposed to be your safe place. You check your phone obsessively, not because you're excited to hear from them, but because you're terrified of what their silence might mean. And you've memorized the patterns of their withdrawal. You can predict when they're about to pull away, when they're about to make you feel like you're too much or not enough. And instead of recognizing these patterns as red flags, you treat them as challenges, as problems you need to solve, as evidence that you just haven't loved them correctly yet. You apologize for things that aren't your fault, because apologizing is easier than risking their anger. You suppress your needs, because expressing needs might make them leave you. Ignore the ways they hurt you, because calling them out might mean being alone. And you've become so skilled at this dance of self-erasure that you don't even notice you're doing it anymore. It's just automatic, the way you shrink yourself to fit into whatever space they're willing to give you that day. You can't tell the difference between love and anxiety anymore because they've become the same thing in your nervous system. The flutter in your stomach when you see them isn't butterflies, it's adrenaline. It's your body preparing for the unpredictability of someone who's only emotionally available when it's convenient for them. And you've mistaken this constant state of hypervigilance for chemistry, for passion, for proof that what you have is special when really what you have is traumatic bonding. The attachment that forms, not because someone makes you feel safe, but because they make you feel unsafe in such specific ways that your childhood wounds recognize them as home. You stay not because you're happy, but because leaving would mean facing the terror that maybe you're not actually lovable when you're not performing, when you're not fixing, when you're not earning your place in someone's life through constant effort and accommodation. You give and give and give, and somehow it's never enough. And you've started to believe that's just what love costs. That real love means depleting yourself for someone who takes everything you offer and still looks at you like you're disappointing them. And when friends suggest that maybe this relationship isn't healthy, you defend it. You explain all the reasons why it's actually beautiful, why the pain is meaningful, why the struggle is proof of depth. Because admitting that you're trapped in a dysfunctional pattern would mean admitting that you chose this, that you stayed when you should have left, that some part of you needed the dysfunction because at least dysfunction is familiar, at least suffering for someone. Attention is a game you learned how to play as a child when love was conditional and affection was something you had to earn by being good enough, quiet enough, useful enough to deserve it. Here's what actually happened to create this pattern, and it's not your fault even though you're the one repeating it. Somewhere early in your life you learned that love is not something you receive just for existing. You learned that connection is conditional, that attention must be earned, that affection is withdrawn as punishment and given as reward, and your developing brain, desperate for survival and belonging, adapted to this reality by becoming hyper-aware of other people's needs, by learning to read micro-expressions and mood shifts, by becoming a caretaker, a performer, someone who could anticipate what others needed and provide it before they even asked. Because providing it meant staying connected, and staying connected meant staying safe. You didn't choose to become this way, you became this way, because it was the only way to get your needs met in an environment where your needs were treated as burdens, where crying was met with irritation instead of comfort, where expressing vulnerability was met with dismissal instead of reassurance, where love was something you had to work for rather than something that was freely given. And that foundational experience shaped your entire understanding of what relationships are supposed to feel like. Which is why even now, decades later, you're still attracted to people who make you work for their love, who keep you slightly off balance, who give you just enough to keep you hoping but never enough to make you feel secure. The truth that nobody wants to tell you, the truth that will either wake you up or make you defensive, is this. What you're experiencing in this relationship isn't love. It's the reenactment of your earliest wounds. It's your subconscious mind trying to finally get it right, trying to finally be good enough to earn unconditional love from someone who's fundamentally incapable of giving it. and you keep staying because some broken part of you believes that if you can just love them hard enough, sacrifice enough, be patient enough, eventually they'll transform into the person who sees you and chooses you, and makes you feel like you're enough. But that's not how healing works. You can't heal your childhood by finding someone who hurts you in the same ways your caregivers did, and then trying to get a different outcome. That's just trauma repetition. That's your nervous system mistaking familiar pain for intimacy and choosing it over and over because at least familiar pain is predictable. At least you know how to survive it. Whereas actual healthy love, love that's stable and secure and doesn't require you to prove your worth constantly, feels foreign, feels boring, feels like it can't be real because it doesn't activate your hypervigilance system, doesn't make you feel like you're fighting for survival, and without that activation, you don't recognize it as connection. You don't know how to receive love that doesn't come with conditions because conditional love is the only language you speak fluently. You don't trust people who show up consistently because consistency wasn't modeled for you, so it feels like a trap. You don't believe you deserve care without earning it because you were taught that your value is determined by your usefulness, and so you keep choosing people who confirm these beliefs, who treat you like an option, who make you compete for their attention, who withdraw affection when you displease them and dole it out strategically when you perform correctly. Because that dynamic, as painful as it is, makes sense to your nervous system in a way that unconditional love never could. The person you're with isn't the problem, or they are, but they're also just a symptom. The real problem is that you're addicted to the chaos because chaos is what your body learned to associate with connection. And until you rewire that association, until you teach your nervous system that safe love is real love and anxious love is just familiar love, you'll keep ending up in relationships that hurt. Because hurt is what you unconsciously seek when you're looking for intimacy. So what do you do when you realize that what you've been calling love is actually just desperation for connection? When you understand that you're not choosing partners, you're choosing wounds that feel like home. When you see that you've been sacrificing yourself on the altar of someone else's emotional unavailability, hoping that your suffering will somehow make you worthy of the love you should have received freely all along. You start by grieving by acknowledging that you never learned what healthy love looks like because you weren't shown it. And that's not your fault. That's not a personal failing. That's just the reality of growing up in an environment where love was conditional or inconsistent or absent. And you needed to survive, so you adapted, and the adaptation worked for keeping you alive, but it's destroying you now, and you get to be angry about that. You get to be sad about it. You get to mourn the childhood you should have had where love was safe and freely given instead of something you had to earn through perfect behavior and emotional caretaking. You make the brutal choice to walk away from relationships that require you to shrink yourself, to betray your needs, to constantly prove your worth. And this will feel like dying, because your attachment system is screaming that being alone is more dangerous than being in a painful relationship. But you do it anyway. You create space between yourself and the person who makes you feel small. And in that space, you start the slow work of learning what your needs actually are underneath all the conditioning that taught you to suppress them. You practice saying no without apologizing. You practice asking for what you want without immediately backtracking. You practice sitting with the discomfort of not knowing if someone likes you, instead of shape-shifting into whatever you think they want to see. And it's hard. It's so hard because every instinct you have is screaming at you to go back to the familiar pattern, to reach out, to fix it, to try harder. But you don't. You stay with the discomfort long enough that your nervous system starts to learn that survival isn't dependent on maintaining connection at any cost. You actively seek out and practice relationships, friendships first, where people show up consistently, where your needs are met without you having to beg, where you can be yourself without fear of abandonment. And at first these relationships will feel wrong, will feel too easy, will make you suspicious because where's the drama, where's the intensity, where's the proof that this matters? But you override that instinct, you stay in the discomfort of being treated well, and gradually, so gradually you barely notice it happening, your nervous system starts to recalibrate. Starts to understand that safe love is real love. That you don't have to suffer to be worthy of connection. That people who truly love you don't make you constantly wonder if they're about to leave. And one day you'll look back at the relationship you thought was love. The one that made you anxious and small and exhausted. And you'll finally see it for what it was. Which was not love but desperation. Not connection but codependency. Not passion but panic. And you'll be grateful you left. Grateful you chose yourself. Grateful you finally learned that love isn't supposed to hurt, it's supposed to heal. And anything that consistently makes you feel worse about yourself isn't love, it's just trauma wearing a disguise. And you don't owe trauma your loyalty just because it feels familiar.